Louise continues, now that we have a few reference points, we can estimate the complexity of each new item relative to the reference items. Everyone please take a moment to compare exporting the profit and loss report as a CSV to each of the reference items that I mentioned previously, and then to assign a complexity value to it accordingly. For example, if you feel that exporting the profit and loss report is about as complex as adding a pie chart to the business expenses report, then you should assign it an 8. But if you feel that it's less complex than the pie chart, but more complex than the online health feature, then you should assign it a 3 or a 5. And of course, if you feel that it's more complex than the pie chart, then feel free to assign it any value over 8 that's part of the Fibonacci sequence. This is where the question mark comes in. If you ever encounter a feature that you feel is more complex than the 21-point tax deduction report, then you should feel free to throw the question mark card to prompt further discussion amongst the development team, or to look for a way to break it down into several smaller items. And, Alan adds, we'll try to only add items to the sprint that we're confident we can deliver in a 2-week period. Since the tax deduction report took several weeks to complete, we know that we're unlikely to complete a 21-point product backlog item in a single 2-week sprint. This means that any 21-point item would need to be broken down into smaller items before we'd consider adding it to the sprint. To start, we'll only add items 13 points or smaller into our sprint. But be aware that we'll likely lower this threshold even further in future sprints as we start to get a better understanding of how long certain sized items tend to take us to complete. Louise notices that while Priyanka tosses her 5 card, Josh tosses a 2 card, and Peter tosses an 8. Louise starts with Josh. Josh, I noticed that you tossed a 2, which is on the low end of our hand. Why do you feel that this item is a 2? Well, Josh answers, this is an existing report that we've already built, so we already have the data set up and the business rules are pretty well understood. Plus, we already have that great CSV library in the project that we found last year when we needed to add data backup. So it seems pretty straightforward to add that same functionality to an existing report. Louise answers, that's a great point, Josh. Thank you for reminding us of that. But Peter, you tossed an 8 for this item. Can you tell us a little more about that? Sure, said Peter, looking a bit nervous. I agree with Josh that the profit and loss report is well understood, and we've had good luck exporting CSV in the past. The reason that I thought this was a bit more complex, though, is that although our reports are well understood, they tend to be very detailed. So, I'll need to generate several variations of both this report and its export, and then painstakingly compare the results of each to ensure that they match. It's relatively easy to glance at an export and say that all the columns are there and the expected row count matches. But verifying that no data was accidentally transformed or lost during the export can take a pretty significant amount of time. I had assumed that our complexity estimate should include the entire team's effort to actually complete the item, not just the coding portion. Is that correct? At this point, Alan jumps into the conversation and says, Peter, thank you for bringing that up. Since you'll be operating as a cohesive team, remember you're all developers now, your complexity estimate should include the entire time required to design, code, and test a feature or to do anything else that you need to do to be confident as a team that it's complete. After the team has had a moment to consider this new idea, Louise says, okay, let's toss our planning poker hands one more time in light of all this new information. Louise counts to 3 one more time and the entire team tosses their 5 card on the table. Louise replaces Dave's original complexity estimate on the backlog item with the team's new estimate of 5, and Dave begins to introduce the next item. After the team has worked through several items and accumulated about 18 complexity points in the sprint, Priyanka raises her hand. This feels like enough work for a 2-week sprint, especially since you estimated the tax deduction report at 21 points, and that report took us about 3 weeks to complete. Is this a good place to stop? Both Louise and Alan nod their head, and Alan adds, I agree, this feels about right. At our next sprint planning, we'll look at the amount of points actually completed and adjust this number up or down accordingly. I'd also like to say for everyone's benefit that please remember that this is a forecast of work that we think we can complete in this sprint, not a commitment. As I've mentioned before, a core value of an agile approach is that teams should work at a sustainable pace. This means that they shouldn't work at a higher effort than they can sustain for an extended period of time. Doing so would not only contribute to team member burnout, but would also create an unrealistic expectation of the amount of work a team can deliver over the long term. Creating a team that is predictable over the long term is significantly more valuable to an organization than a team that is capable of delivering a large amount of work in one sprint, but then delivers an erratic amount of work in most other sprints. To put it another way, when working with the Scrum framework, predictability is the goal, not velocity. Alan continues, before moving on, I'd like the development team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner to all work together as a Scrum team to craft a goal for this sprint that captures the essence of all the work that they'd like to deliver. Remember that a good sprint goal should focus on the what, not the how. Not only will this help you better understand the cumulative business value of all the work that has been selected, but it will also give you some flexibility to consider an alternative approach to that goal if you discover a more effective approach inside of the sprint. Alan continues, sprint goals are either crafted from the bottom up or from the top down. Bottom-up goals are created by looking at the items selected for the sprint and then trying to build a cohesive description of what the net result of delivering those items will be. Top-down goals, on the other hand, are created by looking at the long-term vision for the product and then deciding which large step forward would be the most impactful to the organization. Either approach can be successful as long as the result has been crafted and agreed to by the entire Scrum team and it's a coherent statement of what the team hopes to accomplish in the next sprint. After looking at the items selected and remembering Dave's initial explanation of the business objective at the beginning of the sprint planning session, the team decides on the sprint goal of provide various options for customers to export their data from the profit and loss report. This goal will not only serve as a great reminder of what the team hopes to accomplish during the sprint, but it will also help the team evaluate any trade-offs or decisions that must be made while allowing them to still stay true to their stated goal.